Spending £160 on a brand new wedge in 2025 could be a huge waste of money for certain golfers. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying wedges aren't important. Actually, I'd argue they're one of the most critical ways for any golfer to lower their scores. But throwing money at it isn't necessarily the answer. Guys, how are you doing? Simon here at SAS Golf Academy, and I was rummaging through the wedge section at Replay Golf to find the best deals, the best unusual choices, the best bargains, the best bang for your buck, I should say, when it comes to a wedge in 2025 for a lot of you watching. However, telling you what a good value wedge is in 2025 is one thing, but also telling you how to get the most out of any wedge is a completely different matter. Because more than 50% of our game is within 100 yards of the flag, which is why it's crucial to know the impact factors that go into hitting a great wedge shot, as well as picking out a great wedge for your game. Hence why I've got 4 very good value choices for today's video. But unlike getting that information, which typically is reserved for a club fit and a hefty price tag for a wedge, I'm simply going to give you all of that information throughout this video. Let's talk strike location, and I guess tiny bit of grooves as well. And I had to bring this wedge back from last year. Why? Because I can't simply beat it. And unlike the other 3 wedges I've got for this video, my whole channel's about if it can't be beaten, then why are we replacing it? And when it comes to forgiveness and help for you guys that don't necessarily have the tightest strike location on your wedges, when it comes for value for money, this Cleveland CBX2 is so good for the price tag that it holds in the secondhand market. Now, you could definitely deem this as a more high handicap wedge, or let's say that golfer that has very little confidence with their wedge shots, a lot of thins, a lot of fats. And why exactly is this wedge so good for those golfers? Well, it's because of that thing right there on the bottom of the sole. Same reason that we see, let's say, cavity back irons, more beginner irons, having also big soles, big chunky heads, so that if you don't hit it quite right or you hit the ground a touch early, in terms of MOI, in terms of still transferring some kind of ball speed to the ball on not necessarily the perfect strikes, well, both that cavity back and this wedge is obviously going to help a lot more than others. And if your strike location looks similar to the one that I've just produced there, or let's say it scatters all over the wedge, just like the scratch marks of this wedge is showing us right here, I honestly wouldn't look at anything else. The other bits of this video, I'm going to show you how to get more spin, how to potentially get more distance, more control. But if you're not finding the face consistently, scrap all of those other elements, as we just want the ball forward and somewhat up in the air. However, as we get better at this game, we want to play lower flighted shots. We want to open that face up to play higher flop shots, which realistically, this wedge doesn't necessarily allow us to do. Which neatly brings me on to this rather unusual looking wedge, and I'm really excited to talk about it and the price that you can get it for. Grooves is a big talking point when it comes to wedges. One of the biggest reasons that we feel compelled to buy a brand new wedge, because we don't want to lose spin. And I'm going to talk a lot more about how to produce spin and how to get those zipping wedge shots onto the green. However, this Mizuno wedge, and I'll show you the prices down here on the right hand side, it's only been out a couple of years, and I can only presume by the very unusual look that it has, rather short looking hosel, this cavity back very much towards the heel, quite a lot of weight outside the toe, is one of the reasons it's not doing that well in the secondhand market. But considering in this list we've gone from super forgiving and we're going to slowly go down to more, let's say, precise bladed looking wedges through this list, this is a great next addition. Relatively new, there's going to be tons out there with brand new grooves, gleaming grooves, just like this, but with a touch of forgiveness and that central sweet spot that Mizuno designed this whole wedge around. And if you're one of those players that has a problem in terms of distance control, as well as some going really high, some coming out really low, that shortened, compact, central sweet spot as well as mass helps with that. That being said, technique is king when it comes to the wedge game. The wedge game is a game within itself, and I want to hit 2 wedge shots, purely so that I can demonstrate how important technique is and potentially show you guys what you might need to work on. The first one, we're going to be very steep with a closed face. We're going to have a low penetrating ball flight. Because I do swing the club quite fast, I'm still going to get quite a lot of spin out of this thing. 107 yards. And putting aside the negative of that shot, we've hit a lovely little shot there. Launch angle, low, punchy. The wind's not touching that. We got good efficiency, even with this 58-degree wedge that I have in my hand. Considerable stopping power and very much finished on my target line. But look at that thing right there. That's going to be taking a nice stake out of the fairway, especially if there's a bit of moisture in the grass. Now that shot there was great on the good shot. The bad shot though is a very fine line. Because my club face was so close on the way down, I was able to have my hands so far ahead of the golf ball that this 58-degree wedge turned into a 48-degree wedge. But look what part of the club is going to hit the ground first. Meaning that if I don't catch the ball incredibly close to where I also hit the ground, well, on a wet golf course, the same shot under a lot of nerves, it's not really going to go anywhere. Which is why I now want to show you the opposite side of the spectrum. Someone that has the face very open. And I talk about the face in the downswing a lot because depending on where the face is pointing in the downswing, our brain focuses very clearly on hitting a straight shot. So if my face is open like this on the way down, I want to hit the ball towards the target. So what am I going to do? Subconsciously, add loft to straighten that face up. Or, like I did a minute ago, if my face is incredibly closed on the way down, I'm never releasing it. I'm probably sliding into the ball to make sure that I don't release it. I'm keeping my hands very late in terms of the release, so that again, you guessed it, the face is still pointing towards the target. Therefore, this shot here, where I have the face very open, I'm going to release early, very much like a bunker shot, is now going to use all the bounce. We're actually going to have very minimal risk if we hit the ground before the golf ball, because that bounce is going to glide off quite a lot of surfaces, even if wet. The downside is I've got zero compression now. I've got almost too much loft. No matter how expensive, how clean and sharp my grooves are, that ball has got absolutely nothing to grip onto. And even though I swung that shot exactly the same as we did for the very steep one a minute ago, we're almost 30 yards behind it. So you guessed it. What do we want? Well, we kind of want a bit of both, don't we? We want to make sure that we're not always using that leading edge, that very fine line between great shot and dreadful shot. But at the same time, we need some compression. We need to make sure we can transfer some ball speed into that ball from the club face. And it's one of the biggest things I want you guys to take away from this video is the fact, yes, choose a wedge that's going to suit your game more. However, technique is king when it comes to the masterful game of wedge play. And a £160 brand new wedge won't cure either of those faults, whether you're player A or player B, which is why we should probably talk about a bit more versatility. I'm really excited this wedge has now come down to around the 60 to 80 pounds. Auctions, this wedge doesn't do that well, so if you're patient, you can pick a full set of these up for around 60 pounds, which I do believe is great value. But also let's talk about why I've got this in the list, because let's talk about bounce. Let's talk about grinds. As a very simple, quick guide, bounce is there dependent on your turf conditions, let's say. So if the ground's very firm, you want little bounce. I recommend a lot of my players, because we're in England, quite a lot of bounce. 9 months of the year, our ground's very soft, it's very wet, and for 3 months of the year, it does get really firm. But it makes sense. It's why we see, let's say, 58-degree wedges, let's say sand wedges, have a lot of bounce. Why? Because the bunker has got nothing underneath it. It gives way. It's the best representation, let's say, of needing a club that needs a lot of bounce. Otherwise, you run the risk of, let's say, just going straight underneath the thing. which is also why soles can be important, depending on what shot shape or what height or what suits your eye when you're playing particular shots. Now, I'm not going to go through all the sole grinds. I'll leave some stuff up here from the Ping one, for example, but TaylorMade, Callaway, Titleist, Ping, they come out with different soles. And if you feel like you're not player or player B and you're kind of in the middle and you want to push your wedge game to the next level, I highly recommend doing a bit of research on what different soles do for you. Whether you're that player that's 50 yards out from the flag and you like to play low chasers up towards the flag, or that player that likes to be a bit more aggressive, open that face up a touch, release underneath it a bit more, then you can obviously get that sole or grind to match your game. However, if you're like me, and probably goes to show why I need to work more on my wedge game, I normally always go for the standard sole or grind from any wedge manufacturer, and in Ping's case, that would be the S like I have here. Which brings us on to the most important factor when it comes to wedges, and the wedge I'm most excited about through this entire list, because simply, I don't think it can be beat. And the most important factor that everyone overlooks when it comes to wedges and fitting themselves for second-hand wedges, let's say, is gapping. Too often I see a player come in with a head design like this, and they need these clubs. The clubs are fitted for them great. However, they have it into a pitching wedge, and that pitching wedge goes around 125 yards. Why? Because it's de-lofted, and it needs to be de-lofted because actually that produces the right launch and spin for them. However, they automatically just assume, because that's what they see most other bags, or let's say professional bags, having a 52, even just a 50-degree wedge as well, putting it in the bag, and all of a sudden, full swing with that thing, they're lucky to get 95 yards out of it. Research what loft your wedge is in your set. If you've got a pitching wedge that's, let's say, 42, 43, 44 degrees in terms of loft, I highly recommend just getting a gap wedge in that iron set to cover the gap. And then get something similar to this, especially if you're used to cavity back irons, and getting a 50-degree one or 52-degree one, because that very much will close the gap. However, even for those better players that use, let's say, more players irons, and you've got a pitching wedge in your set that's 46 degrees, then still don't get a 52-degree wedge, get a 50-degree wedge. Always take 4 degrees off what your wedge actually is, and then you could potentially get something that looks a bit like this to then slide into the bottom end of your bag. I typically have always played 50 degrees, 54 degrees, and 58 degrees. And these RTX 6 are coming down in price. They are very new. They look great. The face itself looks like it's going to take the cover off the ball. And to be honest, by the looks of things, it is taking the cover off the ball. However, gapping is easily the biggest mistake I see so many golfers make. They have too lofted of a wedge. They try and hit it super hard just to get it towards the target, and invariably make more mistakes because they're swinging well outside their comfort zone, opposed to having something a bit more de-lofted, something that's a bit more controlling, the right head style, good, decent grooves, because the wedge has only been out for a few years. You got a good price for it, so if you don't like it, you're not going to lose much money if you want to get rid of it, and therefore you can swing very much within yourself. Start hitting more greens, start getting tighter dispersion, and start taking advantage within 100 yards rather than being scared of it. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Any questions, sasgolfacademy.com, and I'll catch you guys later.